afternoon and welcome to the very first episode of Inside Albania with me, Alice Taylor. As you'll probably know, Albania has been in the grips of an election frenzy over the last couple of months. And tomorrow, Sunday the 14th of May, Albanians will go to the polls to vote for their municipal leaders and councillors. Now, the second half of today's show, we'll be delving a little bit deeper into the technicalities of this, while being mindful of the electoral silence law, because I don't want to get into trouble with any authorities, particularly not on the first episode. Now, before we get to the elections and our guest for today, I want to take a look at some of the other headlines that caught my attention over the last 7 days. So the first topic on the agenda is that of migration, a very, very hot topic for Albanians. Now, migration has long been a big issue. Since the fall of communism in the early 90s, some 1.4 million Albanians are believed to have left the country, with around 700,000 of them going in the last decade. Now, there is a census scheduled for September, which will hopefully shed a little more light on the situation in terms of how many have left and how many have returned. However, in 2022, 16,000 Albanians sought asylum in the UK. Now, this accounted for 16% of all asylum applications during that period in the country. It was also 3 times more than the year before. Now, most of these arrivals came across the channel in small dinghies and boats and were organised by criminal gangs. Now, in the EU, during the same year, which, as you know, does not include the UK anymore, there were a total of 13,600 asylum applications lodged by Albanians in the 27 member states. Now, recent data from Eurostat that I got my hands on this week showed that Albanians were also top of the list for forced returns from the bloc, with 9,950. And another 15,630 were refused entry. Now, this exodus has caused huge waves in international media, particularly in my home country, the UK, as well as a lot of concerns at home in Albania over what's causing the problem. But in 2021 and 2022, it's important to note that around half of the UK's initial decisions on Albanian asylum applications were actually approved, with even more then approved on appeal. Now, this suggests that while there is a problem with irregular migration and unfounded asylum applications, there are also founded cases. However, this week, Eurostat reported that between January and February of this year, 1,675 Albanians sought asylum in an EU member state. This is a decrease of around 14% on the same period the year before, signalling that something is changing. Now, this trend was also present in the UK. Just 29 Albanians crossed the channel in the first 3 months of the year, and this is a huge difference when we look at the 1,109 that made the same journey in the last quarter of 2022. Now, so serious is this migration issue that in Europe, the European Commission has made dealing with the issue a core part of Albania's accession process. In other words, Albania must reduce the amount of unfounded asylum applications in the bloc before it can progress further. Meanwhile, in the UK, the Albanian and UK government have set up a joint migration task force in hopes of managing the situation. But as for what's driving the migration issue, this is a very serious and a very complex topic and doesn't just have one answer. So I think it's best to deal with that in another episode of the podcast. So another topic that caught my eye this week was to do with school leavers. I was really surprised to read that according to a recent study from the Regional Cooperation Council, 17% of Albanian youth are not in any form of schooling or training. This is 3 times higher than the European average and around 10 percentage points higher than other countries in our region. Now, this data has been supported with other data from UNICEF, who pointed to 17% of students leaving school early in 2021, with almost a quarter aged between 15 and 24 not in any form of education or employment. Now, in the hopes of tackling these very concerning statistics, The government, in collaboration with UNICEF and the Italian embassy in Tirana, has announced an initiative to stop children dropping out of school. This 3-year project will identify those most at risk of leaving and hope to engage them through focusing and directing them towards the subjects they excel in, engaging them in extracurricular activities, and general monitoring of their integration within the schooling system. Now, with me today, I have Altin Hazizai from the Children Human Rights Centre of Albania. Altin, why is the rate so much higher than the rest of Europe and the region, and what's driving it?
First of all, I want to say that actually the statistics is not lying. So they're telling the truth, and they're telling the truth from 2015, when Albania was the worst ranking country for youth not in training and not in education. Secondly, there is, and we have said this for a very long time as organization, there is lack of trust into public education, which means that young people, they want to leave this country, get education abroad, and of course, and find a good job in a European country or some Western country. We are conducting right now a wide research with lots of interviews, something like 700 young people. And what we find quite shocking in the preliminary results of this study, it is that most of the young people, they state the fact that there is lack of investment and lack of support by the government that basically sends them away from education, from training to a foreign country. I really hope that Albanian government will take this data and this, let's say, information very seriously, because young people need to stay in this country. They need to believe in this country, and they need to change this country. So unless the government changes the policies and puts more money into young people, then I think this will continue the trend to be the same.
So next up on my agenda this week is a story related to the earthquake. Now, as most of you will probably remember, on the 19th of November 2019, central Albania was struck by a 6.4 magnitude earthquake. Now, this earthquake immediately flattened a number of buildings, left thousands of people homeless, and sadly killed 51 people. This week, the Albanian Ombudsman released a report based on 2022, where it took a look at the reconstruction process across the entire country. Now, it found that 4 years later, there are still families that are struggling to even have safe or basic accommodation. They also noted slow progress in the reconstruction situation and a lack of transparency. In particular, they mentioned that rural families cannot simply be rehoused into urban areas. Now, many rural families will rely on the land, animals, growing fruits and vegetables for their sustenance and their income, and moving them to a new block of apartments in an urban area is simply not possible. Now, the EU and international donors pledged some 1.15 billion to help Albania with the reconstruction process. The EU delegation in Tirana and various UN agencies are working together to help the government with implementation, with reconstruction, particularly in relation to schools and historic and cultural sites. Contacted by Inside Albania for comment, the EU delegation in Tirana said, "Transparency is very important in the process of a post-earthquake reconstruction, and with a clear, efficient and transparent financing mechanism allowing accountability for funds." They also added that all the funds managed by the UN and the EU are demonstrated through 2 online platforms which showcase the results of their work. So next up, COVID. Yes, COVID is still amongst us, although it seems like a million years ago that we were wearing masks and staying 2 meters from each other and being locked at home with our nearest and dearest while going slightly crazy. Now, since the beginning of the COVID-19 vaccination program in Albania, which started in January 2021, the government has spent some 44.4 million on COVID vaccines. According to data from the Ministry of Health, some 1.5 million people were vaccinated in 2021, and over 500,000 people received a dose the following year. For 2020-23, The vaccination campaign continues in local health centres where any resident or citizen can receive the vaccine or a booster free of charge. Now, I reached out to the Institute of Public Health to ask how many active cases there are in the country, whether we're seeing an increase or a decrease, but unfortunately, we did not get any response by the time of filming. So the next topic that caught my eye this week is the minimum basic income. So according to the Albanian Ombudsman, the average Albanian needs 18,500 lek, roughly equivalent to 167 euros per month to provide basic sustenance. Now, the Ombudsman has appealed to the government to enshrine this figure into law, as they say Albania is one of the few countries in Europe that doesn't have such a minimum. Now, they say it should be enshrined in law and used as the basis for drafting any sort of legislation related to social assistance. So it should be considered a minimum when considering pensioners, people with disabilities, those receiving any form of job seekers allowance or similar. Now, in 2022, Albanian civil society organisations conducted a nationwide petition on the same topic, calling for a legally defined minimum income. However, the call has yet to be answered. Now, the problem is Albanians are currently the most at risk of poverty in the whole of Europe, with almost half of the population living in poverty or at risk of poverty. The country's risk level is around twice the EU average. Now, as for the minimum wage, as of the beginning of April, it was raised to 40,000 lek from the previous 34,000 lek. However, with an inflation rate around 5% according to the official data, families are struggling to keep up. So, if you've travelled outside of Albania recently, or you've tried to spend euros anywhere, you will know that the lek and the euro are experiencing a bit of a moment. So this week, the euro fell to a historic low against the lek, with an exchange rate of 110.73 Albanian lek for every €1. Now, this situation is due to a variety of different factors, such as a larger influx of euros into the market, increased direct foreign investment, and an uptick in exports. But with the tourist season looming on the horizon and even more euros due to flow into Albania's economy, experts say the situation is not likely to improve. Now, representatives of export businesses have been very concerned by this exchange rate, and they've asked the government to take action. They say this exchange rate is a big problem because they're selling their products outside of Albania, being paid in euros, but then having to pay their bills, staff, utilities, raw materials locally in lek. They say many of their members are at risk of bankruptcy if the trend continues. So, on Thursday, the Ministry of Finance and Economy announced some short-term measures that it hopes will alleviate the situation. Now, the first of these measures is VAT refunds for exporters, which previously took 30 days to be processed. Under the new rules, these will now be processed in a record-breaking 3 days. Secondly, there will be a prepayment of profit tax instalments for all exporting companies that export more than 70% of their products. In addition, a working group will be set up with the Bank of Albania, exporters, and the Association of Banks to discuss any future action. Also this week, the central bank announced it would keep its key interest rate at just 3%, as global trends combined with the strength of the lek have taken the edge off inflation. So tomorrow morning, Albanians will head to the polls to cast their votes for mayors and local councillors across the country. Let's just take a quick look at the key figures ahead of tomorrow's vote. So voting is going to take place in 61 municipalities. There are 3.65 million eligible voters, although not all of them will be in Albania to cast a vote. There are 144 mayoral candidates, 23,700 councillor candidates, and they will be vying for 61 mayoral positions, 1,603 councillor positions. Now, all of these candidates come from 40 political parties, and the citizens of Albania will be casting their votes from the early morning in 5,211 voting centres. Votes will then be counted in 42 ballot counting centres, And we are trialing, well, not me personally, but they are trialing electronic voting and counting in a number of municipalities. These will be counted in 401 voting centres. Now, with me today to discuss some of the finer points ahead of tomorrow's vote, I am joined by Blendi Zeka, who is from Data Centrum, who, if you don't mind me saying, is an expert on electoral systems and a lecturer at the University of Tirana. Now, I did say to you off air, I'm sorry making you talk about elections once again. You must be tired of it by now. But thank you for joining me today and talking about this topic.
Thank you very much, Alice. And I really want to congratulate you first for this new journey for you and for your mission here. And I really want to congratulate you. I have all success.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, so I guess one of the burning topics, one of the most important things about tomorrow is understanding the context in which it's taking place. So, why is tomorrow's vote a little more intense and important than previous municipal elections?
What is going on is that in terms of the political context, tomorrow's vote is important because somehow it is a clear picture about the position of the main political camps and what it should be expected in the next 2 years when we have the general elections. Actually, in Albania, the situation is polarized. So more or less, we have local elections, but mostly it seems that they are a kind of test for political balances in Albania and a kind of prelude for the next general elections.
Thank you. Yes, so tomorrow is going to be very interesting. Now, what I remember from the previous municipal elections was a very, very low voter turnout. I think it was probably one of the lowest ever. Do we have higher hopes that more people will go and vote tomorrow?
Yeah. 2019, it's not a reference as long as the opposition boycotted the elections, but usually in local elections, the participation is lower than the general elections, and this has to do with the logic of the model. As long as the citizens somehow can predict who is the winner, and if the winner is well predicted, the participation is lower because people perceive that they cannot make any difference with their vote. At the moment that they perceive that there is a race and nobody can predict who is going to win, this is one of the strongest reasons to increase the participation. And this is why, in terms of participation, we can have different situations in different municipalities. But overall, I think it would be lower than in general elections.
Can you just explain for people who are not familiar at all with the system here, how are the candidates for lists chosen and what voting system is in place?
In terms of the voting system, we have two ballots. One vote is for the mayor, and it's the formula used to select the winner is first past the post, while the other vote is for the city council, and we are voting for political parties with closed lists, and people have the right to choose one of the parties they prefer, but are not eligible to select the candidates within the list of the party. And this is the model, more or less. While in terms of the candidates, how they are selected, usually it's a bottom-up approach. So the proposals come within the party from the different districts and for different candidates and get approved to the higher, let's say, bodies of the parties.
Okay, so I know from past experience as well that actually the most exciting part of any election in Albania is the days afterwards, where everyone fights over the results.
Yeah, exactly.
So this year we are trialing a system of electronic voting in some areas. What happens if there is a dispute? What's the legal mechanism? And do you think electronic voting will help in the future sort of smooth over this complex period?
In terms of history of managing the voting day and what happens after in terms of counting, Albania has spent a lot of energy in terms of how to manage it and to make it a reliable and a trusted process. And it needs to be mentioned that at least I think for the last 10 years, in terms of procedures and standards, it is improved a lot. But basically, the way how it functions is that the political parties' representatives in all the electoral bodies during the election day, counting commissions somehow being represented there, and they are the guarantee in terms of the process. I think that in terms of procedures, things have been improved a lot, and everything is in place in terms of regulations and how to appeal, where to appeal to the Central Electoral Commissions or at the Electoral College, which is a kind of court when you can appeal for the decision taken from Central Electoral Commission. What is important to mention is that introduction of the electronic voting for 3 municipalities, it's a very good, let's say, initiative, and I hope that everything will go okay, because it somehow saves a lot of energy, time, and dispute, artificial dispute most of the times, that it will increase the trust and the confidence in the process, but also will release all this tension after the election process itself, political tension.
So my last question, I mean, I have a million questions I want to ask you. However, there are 144 mayoral candidates, and amongst them, only 15 women. What's holding women back?
Okay, we have 2 pictures in Albania. When we have a direct contest, like the vote for the mayor, which is a majoritarian system, the number of women is very low. Because it means that the race for the women in Albania in a direct contest, it's still, it is perceived difficult, and the parties are rational at the end of the day. They perceive it as it's too early to have a direct contest and having more women in the process. While we have the other picture, in terms of the vote for the council or in the parliament, we use quotas for women, and Albania, since I think for more than 15 years now, has a number of women in the parliament, in the city council, in my impression, above the average of the EU member states, if we compare them. Actually, 30% of the list in the parliament, in the party list, when they compete for the general elections, are women or are the other gender, being politically correct, while for the city council is 50%.
Yes.
And when we talk about the results in terms of representation and having MPs in the parliament, or women MPs in the parliament, or women city councillors, the number, it's really a good one. And Albania, in terms of gender representation, because of the quotas, I think it's above most of the half of the countries of EU member states. While in a direct context, this is the reality. The quotas are a kind of artificial mechanism in terms to address the discrimination of the other gender. While in the direct context, it seems that Albania still has to improve the environment for making it normal and more possible, and not only to contest a race, but also to have great chances to win. We have things to do.
We do.
Yeah, exactly.
And I hope in the general elections that we will see more women, and
definitely.
then in the following municipal elections as well.
Definitely.
Blendi, thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation.
You've got a very busy couple of days ahead of you. You can follow Election Day tomorrow on Euronews Albania or on the YouTube channel live. We're out of time for this week, but I want to thank you for joining us on the first episode of Inside Albania. Don't forget, you can follow on YouTube, Euronews Albania, and across all major podcasting platforms. Miropavshin.